whole new global talk show, Newstellers. Let's meet our panelists. Do you guys know what this picture is showing?
Looks like abstract or
Looks like a crosswalk made by Salvador Dali.
It's actually a picture from New Delhi, India. The sizzling temperatures there of 50 degrees is making the blacktop melt. And the heat wave has actually killed 1,200 people so far, unfortunately. So really, really extreme. So I assume that the standards of a heat wave vary from country to country. What are the prerequisites, shall we say, for a heat wave in your native countries?
Well, Ireland's not a very warm country, so I don't think they have an official definition of a heat wave, but anything over about 25 or 6 degrees is considered a very warm day.
Oh, really?
So the hottest temperature ever recorded is 33 degrees, and that was the 1880s.
Wow, I
So
think it was
it's not-
33 degrees there
so
last
heat
week
waves in
Korea.
Ireland are quite mild by the standards of a lot of other places.
Okay.
Well,
Spain.
in the case of Spain, it's a very warm country, especially in the south. So a heat wave is considered when there are like 3 consecutive days that the temperature is more than average, the maximum temperature. So in the north of Spain, maybe 30-something degrees can be a heat wave. But in the south, it has to be like maybe 40 or 40-something degrees
Really?
to be considered as a heat wave.
It's that
yeah.
warm.
It's similar in France, where there is the official definition is for 3 days and nights. The temperature is above a certain level, and for example, in Paris, it has to be above 31 degrees during daytime and 21 degrees during nighttime for 3 days consecutively.
Okay. Okay.
Well, Canada is mostly known for its cold weather, but there are hot summers in most of the country, and distinction for what constitutes a heat wave is actually quite similar to what my French and Spanish colleagues described. It's the government deems a heat wave when there are 3 consecutive days where temperatures exceed 32 degrees.
So differing levels of heat required to officially make it a heat wave. We'll be talking about something quite troubling today. Our topic is heat wave alert, the world's on fire. So let's begin with the news briefing section this week. We're seeing really, really high temperatures around the globe. Can you share any stories about recent heat waves?
Well, actually in Spain, there was a heat wave a couple of weeks ago that set some records in some cities. For example, in the northeast of Spain, that is not especially warm, we had the highest temperatures since more than 30 years ago in some cities, and there were temperatures over 40 degrees Celsius.
Oh, wow.
So people were like not really ready for it, and a lot of people had those kind of dehydration problems and stuff. So, well, that was this year in Spain, and maybe because of climate change, we expect those records to be broken again in the upcoming years.
Okay.
One story that caught my eye this week was related to the indirect effects of hot weather, which is in Washington State in the US. There was a terrible accident involving an ice cave that collapsed because of the unseasonably hot weather. And 1 person died and 3 people were injured, unfortunately.
In France, I mean, right now, France is in the middle of a heat wave. According to the Ministry of Health, in the first week of July, we witnessed an increased mortality of 700 people because of the heat. And the Ministry of Labor even asked companies to adapt the schedule of their workers to avoid people to work outside when the temperature is really too high. And the second thing is now, you know, there is a Tour de France, the bicycle race, and it makes the heat wave makes it even more difficult. We know it's already pretty difficult for the cyclists, and now with the heat, it's even more difficult.
Wow.
Well, in Canada, in the far west, in British Columbia, there's some really serious problems caused by extreme heat in the form of more than 100 wildfires. So like right now, like at any, as we're doing our show, there are fires burning in the forests of this province, and firefighters are having a really tough time controlling the blazes. The latest news is that the number of fires is significantly down. A lot of them have been managed to be put out, but this is the kind of natural disaster that I think is occurring with more frequency because with higher temperatures.
Okay.
Even in Seoul, we can see the Han River. Now we see the proliferation of very toxic and green algae or algae, I don't know how to pronounce it. And it seems to be because of the heat. That there is this algae proliferating faster than it should.
So it's happening all around the world.
Yeah.
So when there's a heat wave, it's not just the annoyance of sweat dripping down our faces and our back, which is pretty horrible, but they can actually threaten our lives. Very, very dangerous. So let's have a look at this graph before we continue with our talk. The National Disaster Management Institute in Korea said the temperature that could cause death in city areas is 29 degrees Celsius and 31 degrees Celsius in rural areas. However, the death rate goes up rapidly once temperatures reach 33 degrees, regardless of region. So potentially catastrophic.
Yeah, I think a heat wave can kill you. The thing is that you have to take a lot of measures. The most important one is drinking a lot of water.
Yes.
You have to keep hydrated. And you have to protect the most vulnerable people in your family or the people near you. For example, there are every summer there are cases of parents who leave a baby inside the car, just going to the supermarket, and they take more time than they thought, and maybe the baby can die, right? So we see those cases every summer. I think everyone should take a lot of care about it.
Indeed.
Yeah, there are a lot of health risks to extreme heat weather, such as heat syncope, which basically just means to faint from extreme heat.
Right.
Basically what happens, your blood vessels dilate and your blood pressure drops. And so you can lose consciousness that way.
Are there any other ailments that might arise from a heat wave?
There is something called heat cramps. This is when you have involuntary spasm of your muscles. For example, abs or the thigh or your biceps. And actually, this is a sign that you should stop being outside, go inside, rest, and stretch, because it means much more serious heat-related disease might come if your muscles start to move without you wanting.
That doesn't sound very healthy, does it?
It does not.
Okay, but humans aren't the only ones suffering from these extreme temperatures. Let's check out this news story. About 100,000 bats have fallen from the sky and died during a heat wave across the southeastern state of Queensland in Australia. With temperatures of over 40 degrees Celsius in recent days, the spokesman for the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, Michael Beattie, said the heat wave was basically a catastrophe for all the bat colonies in the region. So mass deaths of bats, 100,000, that's a huge, huge number. How else can a heat wave be fatal to animals?
Well, also in Australia in 2010, there was a mass death of birds. And some of those birds include quite rare protected species. So it's quite a shame. And it's interesting that even in nature, animals can't deal with these kind of things. It just shows how brutal the circle of life kind of is, really.
Well, actually, here in Korea, we had a similar case this year. A lot of baby toads in late May and early June were found dead because they went out with the first rain of the late spring, but then the warm weather and the drought just killed them.
I was reading this article recently about how, because of the global warming, some researchers found out that many lizards, like wild lizards, are switching gender.
Really?
Yeah, they caught 130 lizards, and among them, 10 who were male actually became female because during the incubation period, the temperature was so high that changed the sex.
Oh, sounds very Jurassic Park-ish, doesn't it?
Well, rising global temperatures are somewhat ironically having maybe the most pronounced effects in the coldest parts of the world. Particularly for polar bears, they're having a tough time walking, in a lot of parts of their territory, they cannot walk continuously for longer periods. The ice is broken up, which makes it harder for them to hunt. What they normally do is they sit on the ice and they wait for seals and other sea life to come up, and that's how they get their food. But as the ice cover decreases, there's more exposed water, which attracts a lot more sunlight and a lot more heat, and then that exacerbates the process. So polar bears are in a really difficult situation now, which is sad because they're really awesome animals.
Indeed. So we've talked about how both humans and animals are being afflicted by the sweltering temperatures. Let's get into some of the causes then. What is behind this extreme climate change?
I think the main driver of climate change is human, or what's called anthropomorphic carbon emissions. We've introduced so much carbon into the atmosphere than like way any other time of human history, and it's trapping a lot of heat in the atmosphere, and it's having all kinds of adverse effects.
I mean, the last UN report, for example, said that it's extremely likely that it's human, the global warming is a consequences of human activity. And actually the figures are very frightening. Since the 50s, the temperature increased 0.6 degrees until today. And now we see the sea level rise up to 3 millimeters. Doesn't seem a lot, but it's every year. And it will likely speed up.
I have to say, I mean, nobody can deny climate change. Climate change is really dangerous. It's here. It's a consequence of the human activity. But I have to say that these days everybody blames climate change for everything. I mean, there's like a warm day in late winter, and it's climate change. There is 3 days raining, it's climate change. But I think those phenomena, they happen in all over the history, and the climatology is not an exact science. So there are some weird things happening sometimes, but these days everybody is talking about climate change for everything.
But I think that's Ada's point exactly, though, which is you can't look at individual weather events, and it's silly to look at a really cold event or a really hot event. But I think unfortunately some people, on both sides, people do it where they just grasp on to whatever evidence they think fits their outlook, and then they say, oh well, look, it was a hot summer, this is climate change. I mean, an individual weather event doesn't actually really tell you anything about the long-term trend, which I think is most important.
Well, that's right. We need to look at aggregate data. Like, we need to look at data that's collected over a long term. And if you look at, I mean, as Fred said, if you look at the aggregate data as it's collected over a long time, it's really obvious that in the last 100 years or so, our atmosphere has changed and weather patterns have changed. What's going on now is not just like a normal cyclical change in planetary activity. This is something that's very unique.
Okay, so we've touched on a few of the negative impacts of global warming and climate change already, but let's have a look at some more. They're considered to be the main causes of heat wave. So lowlands flooded by sea level rises, damage to historical sites, drinking water supplies disrupted, increased wildfire risks by 4 times due to snow melting, and a global heat wave, which we have talked about. So they're really, really massive effects. They'll have global reach. What kind of catastrophic events do you think might arise from these?
The World Health Organization has produced some very stark and very specific as well figures about the number of additional deaths there may be every year because of climate change. So it is predicted that between 2030 and 2050 there could be 250,000 extra deaths annually. So I think it would be certainly interesting to see how those figures are arrived at. There's often, the devil's in the details, but it's certainly a very concerning prediction.
Indeed.
I mean, you mentioned that in the list, but some historical sites might disappear just because they're very close to the sea level, and since the sea level will rise and we'll see a lot of historical sites disappear. I was reading this article in the US, in Jamestown, Virginia, the first settlement by the Europeans might be submerged sooner or later.
Right.
And I think that the purpose of this article was to convey among American readers this sense of, oh, that concerns you too. You will be affected. But cities like Miami, New York, Guangzhou in China are among the list of the most cities in danger of being submerged by the sea level.
And another really bad consequence in the future of climate change is the lack of water, because a lot of rivers and water sources are drying up. For example, in India, they calculate that in the future there will be like dozens of millions of people that they will not have water because of climate change and the growth of population. So we have to keep a really close eye on that climate change. And there are some countries and institutions, they are taking measures, but most of them, they are not really fulfilling the objectives or the target. So I think the international community should push more for that.
Okay. Interestingly, there are some not so terrible consequences to global warming as well. So let's see what some of those might be. Resolving borderline disputes, extended growing season of forests, shorter shipping periods, reduction in cold weather-related deaths among the elderly, and improved agriculture in high latitude regions.
More than benefits of the global warming, we can say that the global warming is going to make some change in the world, and from those changes, we have to adapt to a new world, and there will be some other things that we can take advantage of, even if the global consequences are bad. That's, for example, in Korea, with the global warming, they are starting to change the crops too, and now in Korea they can plant oranges and citron and apples in places that they were too cold before. They are starting to develop those kind of fruit trees. I wouldn't say like it's a really good effect of the global warming, but well, it's the way that human being adapts to it and makes the situation better.
One interesting effect of the reduction in ice cover is that in 2012, for the first year ever, I think, the northeast or northwest passage over Russia and Europe became traversable by boat for the first time. So I wrote about this at the time. There was actually boats that were able to leave from Busan in the south of Korea, and instead of going south and going to Europe that way, we're able to go north and travel along the top. And that cut the time of their trip quite significantly. And so, I mean, I guess that might lead to a small reduction in greenhouse gas emissions if these boats don't have to go as far, and maybe a very faint silver lining to an otherwise very scary situation.
Going back to what Ada was saying about crops and so on, they've already apparently observed this effect on trees. So Norway spruces since 1960 have apparently grown more than 30% faster than previously. And that's apparently because of longer growing seasons and increased carbon dioxide in the air. So while it might not mitigate the overall effects of climate change, there might be some positives or at least other aspects to this that we could capitalize on.
I mean, one of the problems is that because of global warming, there will be a lot of consequences that we cannot even conceive, we cannot even imagine. That's why I'm a bit worried by talking about the maybe benefits. They're nothing compared to the huge threat to humanity that global warming is. For example, now we are facing one of the biggest extinction of animal species in the history of the Earth. And even if technology might help to resuscitate one or two, I mean, there will no way that we can bring this million of species that are currently disappearing back. And we are really destroying our planet right now. I don't think technology can change that.
Okay, so we're going to have to take a lot more measures to try and save this planet.
Exactly,
that
say
we've
what
been
we
given.
can.
Yeah, but in some senses, it's not all doom and gloom, and hopefully, as John and Stephen mentioned, it will lead to new innovative technologies as well. So we've been talking about the impacts of heat waves, and one of its main causes, global warming. So let's talk now about how people are combating this, how they're keeping cool in these sweltering temperatures. Some Russian teenagers got themselves into a bit of trouble recently. With temperatures reaching over 34 degrees Celsius outside, they covered their furniture with polyethylene film and made a swimming pool in the living room of their flat in the city of Oriel. The boys took pictures of themselves swimming together, which went viral all over social media, obviously. Do you think they got in trouble with their parents?
Well, I don't know, but they're really, really good engineers. because it looks easy, but it's not easy at all.
This is true.
Just covering all your living room with that vinyl and make it like no leaks and building the swimming pool and filling it.
Maybe
and
the
for
human
collapse and
human
you don't know.
Maybe, but at least they got it and they got to cool themselves.
It looks dangerous. You can see like electrical outlets.
It's really dangerous, actually.
How else do you guys, maybe not in such an extreme way, but how do you guys cool down in today's
Canada, what
temperatures?
people do, people who can afford it at least, is they leave the city on the weekends and they go north to the cottage. And like what a cottage is like a small house that's in the countryside. The best ones are like right on the lake, so you can fish, you can swim, you can like go out on a boat. And in all honesty, though, the cottage is a big part of Canadian culture. It was a big part of my life growing up. It was like what my friends and I did for fun on the weekend. Was we'd go to the cottage and spend time together. And it's one thing that is very important in the summer in escaping the heat.
Okay.
In Spain, there are swimming pools everywhere because we have a very long and warm and sunny summer. So we can have a lot of options for refreshing ourselves. Going to our own swimming pool, and if you don't have, you go to a friend's swimming pool or a public swimming pool or a private swimming pool. So basically, everyone in the summer, if they don't have the beach side near their houses, they just go to any swimming pool and refresh themselves.
Okay.
Well, Irish people don't really need to cool down because it's never warm in the first place. So if there's a sunny day in Ireland, I think people are so delighted and surprised that they just enjoy it. Since living in Korea, though, I struggle with especially this time of the year in August, I find it really tough. So just to stay indoors or eat an ice cream, or I don't know what else you can do.
You look like you need an ice cream now.
Yeah,
You need to have your energy.
Even coming here, I was like really just dripping. It's terrible.
Right, so what kind of efforts are being taken by the international society then to combat these extreme weathers and anomalous climate events?
Well, Korea has actually made some very ambitious targets and pronouncements on this issue. During the Lee Myung-bak administration, they had set the target of reducing carbon emissions by 30% below what they called business as usual levels. So if they did nothing, they're trying to reduce it below 30% of what that figure would be if they did nothing. And then more recently, they actually bumped up their target to 37%. So it's quite ambitious. Whether it can be reached, though, I think is really the proof will be in the outcome, because Korea's economy is very dependent on imported fossil fuels and that sort of thing. And I think it's very easy to set these targets and to look sort of virtuous in the international community. But in terms of actually making progress, I see very little evidence just around the world in general, because our whole lifestyle is set up in a certain way, and I think people are very reluctant to really change in a drastic manner.
Actually, this year there will be a very, very important international meeting in Paris at the end of the year. It's called COP21, where 200 countries will gather, and they will try to find a common agreement to set up targets in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, and to find a monitoring system to be sure that people will respect this target. And the objective is to keep the increase of temperature below 2 degrees, which is not a very conservative target, actually. And that will be very important, and we really have to follow what will happen in Paris at the end of the year.
Okay. In Europe, we have the EU Action on Climate Change, and we set targets for 2020 and 2030 and 2050, and they are pretty ambitious targets too. They want to cut the emissions like 20% in 2020 compared to 1990, and well, they are working into it, and I hope we can get those targets, but it's going to be difficult like everywhere else. You set some goals, and then you do whatever you can, taking in mind the economic progress and the interests of the big companies and stuff. And I hope that we can at least go close to that target.
Because right now I seem to see mostly news stories about these targets not having been met.
I think one thing that's important to do is to speak out and to try to change how people think about this. And one very outspoken figure has been Pope Francis. On some recent comments that he made, he compared our world. He said more and more the world is becoming a huge pile of filth, which pretty provocative words, but he's not that far off. And the Pope has, in his time at the helm of the Catholic Church, he's established himself as somebody worth listening to, who has strong views and who commands a lot of attention from a lot of people. So that's of course only one step, though, and I think we need to speak out about this because we need to build a consensus.
Okay, so to summarize then, it's down to us individuals as well as the global community to really tackle these issues, really take global warming seriously, because it's causing these extreme heat waves and a lot of other unintended consequences. So everyone needs to get in on the effort. All right, so shall we wrap up with our final headlines as usual? Would anyone like to go first?
I can start.
Okay.
I would say global warming, as you said, we are all in it together.
Okay, I would say global warming is coming, so get your summer clothes ready.
Okay.
I would say that we all have to think about fixing global warming as one.
Okay.
I say it's getting hot out there, whether or not you have a cottage to escape to.
Stephen showing his Canadian side. All right, well, thank you for another thought-provoking topic this week. Hope you enjoyed yourself.
Yep,
We did. Yeah, we did.
Certainly did too. And we will see my lovely panel next week. And join us next week, viewers, for a whole new global talk show, Newstellers. We will be open for any opinions or requests on our official website as well as our Facebook page.
Who doesn't like ice cream? Everyone likes ice cream. July, August, I'm always like really sweaty. It's really uncomfortable. So, and I think more than the local people, I really like, it's really hard for me. So.